Captain Elena Vasquez pressed her palm against the cold metal wall of the transport ship, feeling the subtle vibrations that meant they were still 3 hours from the Kepler station. Around her, 200 of humanity's finest soldiers sat in absolute silence, their faces masks of grim determination. Each one knew what waited for them at their destination, and each one had volunteered anyway. The silence was broken by the soft hiss of the intercom system crackling to life. "Attention all personnel. This is Admiral Chan speaking from the bridge." The Admiral's voice carried the weight of a man who had seen too much war. "In approximately 2 hours and 47 minutes, we will reach Kepler Station. What you will witness there will challenge everything you believe about the nature of warfare, about the limits of human innovation, and about what we are willing to become to protect our species." Elena closed her eyes, remembering the briefing 3 days ago. The holographic displays showing the Zephyrian fleet positions, the casualty reports from the outer colonies, the desperate faces of the High Command as they explained humanity's situation. Surrounded, outgunned, facing extinction at the hands of an empire that viewed humans as nothing more than violent primitives worthy only of extermination. "The Zephyrian Empire has made their intentions clear," Admiral Chen continued. "They will not negotiate. They will not show mercy. They have declared humanity a plague to be cleansed from the galaxy. In response, Project Cerberus has been authorized for immediate deployment." A shiver ran through the transport ship, though Elena couldn't tell if it was from the engines or from the collective reaction of 200 soldiers learning they were about to witness humanity's deepest secret. She opened her eyes and looked across the narrow aisle at Lieutenant Marcus Webb. At 26, he was one of the youngest officers in their unit, but his eyes held the same haunted quality that Elena had seen in veterans of the Titan Wars. They had all seen too much death, too much destruction. The Zephyrians had made sure of that. "Ma'am," Webb whispered, leaning closer so only she could hear. "Do you think it's true? What they're saying about Project Cerberus?" Elena had heard the rumors, of course. Everyone had. Whispered conversations in mess halls about research stations hidden in the darkest corners of space, about experiments that pushed the boundaries of ethics and sanity, about creations that made even hardened scientists wake up screaming. But rumors were all they had been until 3 days ago. "I think," Elena said carefully, "that we're about to find out exactly what humanity is capable of when we stop pulling our punches." The transport ship shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, and, through the small porthole beside her seat, Elena caught her first glimpse of Kepler Station. The massive facility stretched across several kilometers of space, its dark metal surface studded with docking bays, weapons arrays, and structures whose purpose she couldn't begin to guess. But it was the ships surrounding the station that made her breath catch in her throat. Zephyrian battlecruisers hung motionless in space, their hulls dark and lifeless. Dozens of them, each one capable of glassing a planet, now nothing more than tomb ships drifting in the void. Whatever had happened here, the battle was already over. "Jesus Christ," Webb muttered, his face pressed against another porthole. "How many of them are there?" 73 confirmed Zephyrian vessels, came the voice of Sergeant Rodriguez from somewhere behind them. "All dead in space. No life signs, no power signatures, nothing." The implications of that statement hit Elena like a physical blow. 73 Zephyrian ships represented enough firepower to level continents, enough troops to occupy entire star systems. The fact that they were all floating dead in space meant that whatever Project Cerberus had created, it was effective beyond their wildest expectations. As their transport approached one of the station's docking bays, Elena could see the cleanup crews already at work. Figures in hazmat suits moved carefully between the Zephyrian vessels, taking readings, collecting samples, documenting everything. The methodical nature of their work suggested this wasn't the first time they had dealt with the aftermath of a Cerberus deployment. "Docking sequence initiated," announced the pilot. "All personnel prepare for station transfer." Elena stood up with the rest of her unit, checking her equipment one final time. Standard plasma rifle, tactical armor, emergency oxygen supply. The same gear she had carried into dozens of battles across the galaxy. Somehow, she doubted it would be much use for whatever they were about to face. The docking process took another 20 minutes, filled with the usual sounds of mechanical systems engaging, pressure seals activating, and atmospheric processors cycling. Normal sounds that seemed strangely ominous given the circumstances. When the transport finally shuddered to a stop, Elena felt her stomach clench with anticipation. The airlock doors opened with a soft hiss, revealing a corridor that looked like something from humanity's darkest nightmares. The walls were covered in a strange, organic-looking material that seemed to pulse with its own inner light. The air itself felt different, thick with an ozone smell that made Elena's nose burn. But it was the sound that bothered her most, a low, rhythmic thrumming that seemed to come from the station itself, as if the entire structure was breathing. "Welcome to Kepler Station," said the woman waiting for them in the corridor. She was tall and pale, with the kind of gaunt features that suggested too many sleepless nights and too much coffee. Her lab coat was pristine white, but Elena noticed the way her hands shook slightly when she spoke. "I'm Dr. Sarah Chen, Project Director for Cerberus Division." Admiral Chen's daughter, Elena realized. She had heard about the brilliant xenobiologist who had disappeared from public view 5 years ago, supposedly killed in a Zephyrian raid on the research station where she worked. Apparently, reports of her death had been greatly exaggerated. "I know you have questions," Dr. Chen continued, leading them deeper into the station. "But, before I can answer any of them, you need to understand the context of what we've accomplished here. The Zephyrian Empire isn't just another hostile alien species. They're a biological weapon designed by an extinct race called the Architects, created for the specific purpose of cleansing the galaxy of what the Architects considered inferior life forms. They passed through several security checkpoints, each one more advanced than the last. Biometric scanners, genetic analyzers, psychological evaluation systems that seemed to peer directly into their souls." Elena began to understand why Project Cerberus had been classified at the highest levels. This wasn't just a weapons program, it was something far more fundamental. "The Zephyrians are essentially living machines," Dr. Chen explained as they walked. "Their biology is engineered for maximum efficiency in warfare. They feel no pain, no fear, no mercy. They reproduce rapidly, adapt quickly to new threats, and possess an instinctive understanding of tactics and strategy that makes them nearly impossible to defeat through conventional means." Elena had seen Zephyrian soldiers in action, and Dr. Chen's description matched her experience perfectly. They moved like liquid death, coordinating their attacks with a precision that human forces could barely counter. The fact that humanity had survived this long against such an enemy was a testament to human stubbornness more than human superiority. "So how did you stop them?" Lieutenant Webb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen stopped walking and turned to face the group. Her smile was the kind that belonged in a haunted house, full of secrets and shadows that normal people weren't meant to see. "We didn't stop them," she said. "We gave them something better to do." They reached a massive blast door marked with biohazard symbols and warnings in 17 different languages. Dr. Chen placed her hand on a scanner, submitted to a retinal scan, and spoke a passphrase that Elena couldn't quite make out. The door began to iris open, revealing an observation deck that looked down into a vast chamber filled with what Elena could only describe as controlled chaos. The chamber was enormous, easily large enough to hold a city block, and every surface was covered with the same organic-looking material they had seen in the corridors. But, here, the material was clearly alive. It pulsed and writhed with purpose, forming structures that defied description, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. And, moving through it all were shapes that Elena's mind refused to properly process. They looked like Zephyrians, but wrong. Twisted. Enhanced. Some were larger than the baseline species, their chitinous armor thickened and spiked with weapons that grew directly from their flesh. Others were smaller, more agile, their forms streamlined for speed and stealth. All of them moved with the same fluid coordination that Elena remembered, but now that coordination served a different master. "Meet the Cerberus strain," Dr. Chen said, her voice filled with the kind of pride that belonged to a parent watching their child take first steps. "A engineered retrovirus that hijacks the Zephyrian nervous system and rewrites their fundamental behavioral patterns. Instead of seeking to destroy human life, they now exist solely to hunt down and eliminate uninfected Zephyrians." Elena stared at the creatures below, trying to process what she was seeing. The implications were staggering. Humanity hadn't just developed a weapon that could kill Zephyrians, they had developed a weapon that could turn Zephyrians against themselves. The beauty of the system, Dr. Chen continued, is that it's completely self-sustaining. Each infected Zephyrian becomes a vector for further infection, spreading the virus to any uninfected members of their species they encounter. Within hours of initial deployment, an entire Zephyrian battle group can be converted from an invasion force into a hunting pack dedicated to eliminating their former allies. Sergeant Rodriguez stepped up beside Elena, his face pale beneath his tactical helmet. How many of them are there? Currently? Approximately 12,000 active specimens in various stages of development. But that number is growing exponentially as we speak. Every Zephyrian ship that enters this system becomes raw material for the Cerberus program. Elena watched as two of the creatures below engaged in what looked like a training exercise, their movements so fast and fluid that they seemed to blur together. The precision of their attacks, the coordination of their movements, the way they anticipated each other's actions, it was everything that made Zephyrians such terrifying opponents, but now serving humanity's interests instead of their own. This is insane, Webb whispered. We're creating monsters. No, Dr. Chen replied, her voice sharp with conviction. We're creating justice. The Zephyrians came to our worlds, burned our cities, killed our children. They showed no mercy, no compassion, no recognition of our right to exist. So we gave them exactly what they deserve, we turned their own nature against them. Elena found herself both horrified and impressed by the ruthless efficiency of the concept. It was the kind of weapon that could only have been conceived by a species that had been pushed to the very brink of extinction, by minds that had been forced to abandon conventional morality in favor of pure survival instinct. The infection vector is remarkably efficient, Dr. Chen continued, warming to her subject like a professor giving a lecture. Airborne transmission, blood contact, even proximity to infected specimens can trigger the conversion process. The virus is specifically designed to target Zephyrian neural pathways, so it's completely harmless to human physiology. We could swim in a tank of the stuff and suffer no ill effects. And they retain their intelligence? Elena asked, watching as one of the creatures below manipulated what looked like a tactical hologram with fluid precision. Enhanced, actually. The virus doesn't just rewrite their behavioral patterns, it optimizes their cognitive functions for the specific task of hunting other Zephyrians. They become more cunning, more creative, more ruthless. Everything they were before, but focused entirely on destroying their former species. Elena shook her head, trying to wrap her mind around the scope of what she was seeing. How long have you been working on this? 7 years of active development, but the theoretical framework goes back much further. We've known about the Zephyrian threat for decades, and we've been preparing for this war since before it officially started. The public thinks of the Cerberus project as a recent development, but the truth is that we began designing weapons to fight this enemy before most people even knew the enemy existed. The observation deck fell silent as the full weight of Dr. Chen's words sank in. Humanity's leaders had known about the Zephyrian threat for decades and had been secretly preparing for a war of extermination. The ethical implications were staggering, but Elena found it difficult to argue with the results. The 73 dead ships floating outside the station were proof that the Cerberus project worked exactly as designed. What happens now? Elena asked. Dr. Chen's smile became even more unsettling. Now we deploy them. Every Zephyrian world, every Zephyrian fleet, every Zephyrian outpost in the galaxy. Within 6 months, there won't be a single uninfected Zephyrian left alive. The empire that sought to exterminate humanity will exterminate itself, and we'll be there to watch it happen. Elena looked down at the creatures in the chamber below and wondered if humanity had saved itself or damned itself. The Zephyrians had been monsters, but these were monsters that humanity had deliberately created. The question was whether they would remain content to hunt only Zephyrians, or whether their appetite would eventually turn to other prey. As if reading her thoughts, Dr. Chen placed a reassuring hand on Elena's shoulder. Don't worry, Captain. They're completely under our control. The virus includes safeguards that prevent them from harming human personnel. They're the perfect weapon, unstoppable against our enemies, harmless to ourselves. Elena nodded, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they were standing at the edge of an abyss, looking down into something that no amount of safeguards could contain. Humanity had created the perfect weapon to destroy their enemies, but Elena wondered what the galaxy would look like when that weapon was finished with its work. The thrumming sound from the station's walls seemed to grow louder, and Elena realized that it wasn't coming from the station itself. It was coming from the creatures below, a collective heartbeat that pulsed with alien intelligence and predatory hunger. Soon, that sound would echo across the galaxy, and the Zephyrian Empire would learn what it meant to be prey instead of predator. The galaxy had feared humans, but they should have feared what humans were willing to become. 3 weeks after witnessing the horrors of Kepler Station, Captain Elena Vasquez found herself aboard the UES Prometheus, humanity's newest and most advanced carrier, watching the first large-scale deployment of the Cerberus strain. The target was Zirion Prime, the Zephyrian Empire's regional command center and home to over 50 million of the alien soldiers. The bridge of the Prometheus hummed with quiet efficiency as the crew prepared for an operation unlike anything in military history. Instead of weapons arrays and bombardment cannons, the ship's payload bays were filled with specially designed atmospheric processors, each one containing enough Cerberus virus to infect an entire continent. Deployment commencing in T-30 minutes, announced Commander Sarah Walsh, the ship's operations officer. Elena had served with Walsh during the siege of New Geneva, and she knew the woman to be utterly competent and completely ruthless when the situation demanded it. Both qualities would be essential for what they were about to do. Elena stood near the main tactical display, watching as the Zephyrian defensive grid took shape on the holographic projectors. The planet was heavily fortified, surrounded by orbital defense platforms, patrol squadrons, and enough firepower to turn any conventional assault fleet into space debris. Under normal circumstances, capturing Zirion Prime would have required a massive invasion force and months of preparation. Today, they would take it with a crew of 800 humans and no shots fired. Captain Vasquez called Dr. Chen from her position at the science station. The xenobiologist had insisted on personally overseeing this deployment, claiming that she needed to observe the virus in action to fine-tune future applications. Elena suspected the real reason was simpler. Dr. Chen wanted to watch her creation work. "Could you join me for a moment?" Elena walked over to the science station, where Dr. Chen was monitoring a dozen different data streams from the atmospheric processors. Each screen showed a different aspect of the virus deployment system: atmospheric composition, dispersal patterns, viral concentration levels, and transmission vectors. It was the kind of display that belonged in a plague research facility, not on the bridge of a military vessel. The initial deployment will target the planet's 3 largest population centers, Dr. Chen explained, her fingers dancing across the control interface. New Carthage, Ironhold, and the Crimson Spires. Combined, these cities house approximately 38 million Zephyrians, including the majority of their military command structure. Elena studied the tactical display, noting the positions of the Zephyrian fleet elements and defensive installations. What about their orbital defenses? They'll detect the atmospheric processors long before we reach deployment range. Dr. Chen's smile was the kind that belonged in a medical examiner's office. That's the beauty of the system, Captain. We don't need to get close to the planet. The virus is designed to be self-propagating across multiple transmission vectors. A single infected specimen can contaminate an entire ship's crew within hours, and from there the infection spreads to any vessel or facility they contact. She gestured to a smaller screen showing the deployment timeline. Phase 1 involves releasing a small number of infected atmospheric particles into the planet's upper atmosphere. These particles are designed to be virtually undetectable by standard sensors, appearing as nothing more than cosmic dust or solar radiation byproducts. Once they reach the surface, they begin seeking out Zephyrian targets. Elena watched as the simulation played out on the screen, showing tiny viral particles drifting through the atmosphere like malevolent snow. How long before we see results? Initial infection should begin within 6 hours of deployment. Full conversion of the target population will take approximately 72 hours, depending on population density and social interaction patterns. The Zephyrians' highly organized social structure actually works in our favor. Their tendency to gather in large groups for tactical planning means the virus spreads more efficiently than it would in a more dispersed population. The implications were staggering. Within 3 days, one of the Zephyrian Empire's most important worlds would transform from a military stronghold into a hunting ground populated entirely by creatures designed to seek out and destroy other Zephyrians. It was genocide disguised as military strategy, and Elena found herself both impressed and disturbed by the elegant brutality of the concept. T-15 minutes to deployment, announced Commander Walsh. All stations report ready status. Elena looked around the bridge, studying the faces of the crew members. Most of them were veterans of the war, people who had lost friends, family members, entire worlds to Zephyrian aggression. They knew exactly what they were about to unleash, and not one of them showed even a flicker of hesitation. The Zephyrians had taught humanity to be ruthless, and humanity had proven to be excellent students. Lieutenant Webb approached the tactical station, his expression grim. "Captain, we're receiving communication attempts from the Zephyrian defense grid. They're demanding that we identify ourselves and state our intentions." "Standard protocol," Elena replied. "Ignore all communications and maintain silent running until deployment is complete." The next 10 minutes passed with agonizing slowness. Elena watched as the Prometheus moved into optimal deployment position, its stealth systems keeping it hidden from Zephyrian sensors while its atmospheric processors prepared to rain death upon the planet below. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once they took the next step, there would be no going back. "Deployment commencing," Dr. Chen announced. "Atmospheric processors are armed and ready for release." Elena moved to the main tactical display, where she could see the entire operation unfold in real time. The Prometheus launched its payload of atmospheric processors, sending them spiraling down towards Zirion Prime like falling stars. To any observer, they would look like meteorite fragments or space debris, certainly nothing worth worrying about. "Processors have entered the atmosphere," reported Ensign Martinez from the sensor station. "Dispersal patterns are optimal. Viral particles are beginning to spread across the primary target zones." Elena watched as the display showed tiny dots spreading across the planet's surface, each one representing millions of viral particles designed to seek out and infect Zephyrian nervous systems. It was beautiful in its way, like watching seeds being planted in a cosmic garden. The fact that those seeds would grow into something monstrous didn't diminish the elegance of the process. "Phase 1 deployment is complete," Dr. Chen announced. "All processors have successfully delivered their payloads to the target zones. We should begin seeing initial infection reports within the next 4 to 6 hours." Commander Walsh nodded and turned to the communications station. "Send a coded transmission to Fleet Command. Operation Pandora is proceeding as planned. Estimated completion in 72 hours." Elena found herself wondering what would happen after those 72 hours. The infected Zephyrians would begin seeking out uninfected members of their species, spreading the virus to other worlds, other fleets, other populations. Within months, the infection would spread throughout the entire Zephyrian Empire, turning their own biological weapons against them. But what then? Once every Zephyrian in the galaxy was either dead or converted, what would humanity do with millions of creatures designed solely for hunting and killing? The safeguards that Dr. Chen had mentioned seemed reassuring in theory, but Elena had enough military experience to know that no system was foolproof. "Captain," called Lieutenant Webb from his station. "We're detecting movement in the Zephyrian orbital defense grid. 3 patrol squadrons are moving to intercept us." Elena moved to the tactical display, studying the incoming threat. 18 Zephyrian attack craft, each one armed with enough firepower to cripple a human destroyer. Under normal circumstances, the Prometheus would be forced to retreat or face overwhelming odds. But these weren't normal circumstances. "Distance to intercept?" Elena asked. "Approximately 40 minutes at their current speed," Webb replied. Dr. Chen looked up from her station, her eyes bright with anticipation. "Perfect timing. The first infected specimens should be manifesting within the next 30 minutes. Those patrol squadrons are about to become our unwitting test subjects." Elena realized what Dr. Chen was suggesting. The Zephyrian patrol craft would return to their bases after failing to locate the Prometheus, bringing the crew members into contact with the infected population planetside. Within hours, those ships would become floating laboratories for studying the virus in action. All stations, maintain silent running, Elena ordered. We wait and observe. The next hour passed with tense anticipation. The Prometheus remained hidden while the Zephyrian patrol squadrons searched the space around the planet, their sensors probing for any sign of human presence. Elena watched their search patterns on the tactical display, noting the systematic precision that made the Zephyrians such effective soldiers. Soon, that same precision would serve humanity's purposes instead of their own. Captain, called Ensign Martinez. I'm detecting anomalous energy signatures from the planet's surface. Multiple locations showing increased electromagnetic activity. Dr. Chan leaned forward eagerly. That's the neural rewriting process beginning. The virus is starting to alter the infected specimen's brain chemistry, optimizing their cognitive functions for hunting other Zephyrians. Elena studied the energy readings, trying to imagine what was happening on the planet's surface. Millions of Zephyrian soldiers suddenly, finding their fundamental nature rewritten, their loyalty to the Empire replaced by an overwhelming compulsion to hunt down their former allies. It was like watching an entire species commit suicide in slow motion. There, Dr. Chen said, pointing to one of her monitors. The first confirmed conversion. Elena looked at the screen, which showed biometric data from one of the infected zones. Heart rate, neural activity, body temperature, all of it shifting in real time as the virus rewrote the subject's basic biological functions. What had been a Zephyrian soldier 5 minutes ago was now something else entirely, something that existed solely to destroy other Zephyrians. How many conversions are we seeing? Elena asked. Dr. Chen consulted her readings. Approximately 8,000 confirmed infections so far, with the rate accelerating exponentially. The virus is spreading faster than our most optimistic projections. The tactical display began to show new contacts on the planet's surface, movement patterns that didn't match normal Zephyrian behavior. The infected specimens were already beginning to hunt, seeking out uninfected members of their species with predatory efficiency. Captain, Webb called out. The patrol squadrons are returning to base. ETA to the planet's surface is 12 minutes. Elena watched as the 18 attack craft descended toward Zirian Prime, their crews completely unaware that they were flying into a trap of humanity's devising. Those pilots were about to become part of the largest biological warfare experiment in galactic history, and they had no idea what awaited them. Dr. Chen, Elena said quietly, what exactly happens during the conversion process? The xenobiologist's expression grew distant, as if she were remembering something unpleasant. The initial phase involves neural pathway reconstruction. The virus targets the brain centers responsible for species identification, territorial behavior, and social hierarchy. Within approximately 20 minutes, the subject's fundamental behavioral programming is completely rewritten. Elena found herself thinking about the Zephyrian pilots descending toward their home world, about families and relationships and social bonds that were about to be severed forever. Then, she remembered the smoking ruins of New Geneva, the mass graves on Titan Station, the screaming children she had found in the ruins of the Martian colonies. The Zephyrians had shown no mercy when they came for humanity's worlds. They deserved exactly what they were about to receive. Physical changes begin during the second phase, Dr. Chen continued. Enhanced muscle density, improved sensory capabilities, accelerated healing factors. The virus doesn't just change how they think, it changes what they are. By the time the process is complete, they're essentially a new species, one designed specifically to hunt their former selves. The first patrol squadron touched down at a military base near New Carthage, the crews emerging from their ships to be greeted by what appeared to be normal Zephyrian personnel. Elena watched the scene unfold through the surveillance feeds, knowing that those seemingly normal personnel were actually infected specimens who had been converted less than an hour earlier. Contact initiated, Dr. Chen announced. The returning crews are now in direct proximity to infected specimens. Transmission should begin within minutes. Elena watched as the pilots moved through the base, interacting with their infected comrades, completely unaware that they were being exposed to a biological agent designed to fundamentally alter their nature. It was like watching sheep being led to slaughter, except the sheep would become wolves in the process. The psychological component is perhaps the most fascinating aspect, Dr. Chen said, her voice taking on the tone of a professor discussing a particularly interesting experiment. The infected specimens retain their memories, their skills, their knowledge, but all of it is filtered through the new behavioral programming. They remember their former loyalty to the Empire, but now they view that loyalty as a weakness to be eliminated. Elena tried to imagine what that would feel like, to suddenly find yourself despising everything you had once believed in, to view your former comrades as enemies that needed to be destroyed. It was a kind of madness, but a madness with purpose and direction. How long before we see results from the patrol squadrons? Elena asked. Dr. Chen checked her chronometer. Approximately 2 hours for initial infection, another 4 to 6 hours for full conversion. By tomorrow morning, those 18 ships will be carrying our weapon to every Zephyrian outpost in the system. Elena nodded, understanding the exponential nature of what they had unleashed. Each infected ship would carry the virus to new locations, where it would spread to more ships, more bases, more populations. Within weeks, the entire Zephyrian presence in this sector would be converted or dead. The bridge fell into silence as the crew watched their monitors, tracking the progress of humanity's ultimate weapon. There was something both satisfying and terrifying about the efficiency of the process, the way the virus spread through the Zephyrian population like wildfire through a drought-stricken forest. Captain, called Commander Walsh. We're receiving new orders from Fleet Command. Operation Pandora has been expanded to include 12 additional target systems. We're to proceed to the Nexus sector for immediate deployment. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. 12 more star systems, hundreds of millions more Zephyrians to be converted or killed. The scope of what humanity was doing was beginning to sink in. They weren't just fighting a war, they were engineering the extinction of an entire species. Helm, set course for the Nexus sector, Elena ordered. Maximum warp. As the Prometheus turned away from Zirion Prime, Elena took one last look at the tactical display. The planet that had been a Zephyrian stronghold just hours earlier was now showing massive disruptions in communications, transportation, and command structure. The virus was working exactly as designed, turning the Empire's own soldiers into weapons of mass destruction. Elena wondered if future historians would judge humanity harshly for what they were doing, or if they would simply note that survival sometimes required becoming the monster in order to defeat a greater monster. Either way, there was no going back now. The Cerberus strain was loose in the galaxy, and it would not rest until every Zephyrian was either converted or dead. The galaxy had feared humans for their violence and determination. Soon, they would learn to fear what humans could create when their violence and determination were given free rein. The Zephyrian Empire was about to discover what it meant to be hunted by the perfect predator, one that wore their own faces and used their own tactics against them. In the depths of space, the UES Prometheus raced toward its next target, carrying enough biological warfare agents to sterilize entire worlds. Behind them, Zirion Prime writhed in the throes of its transformation, a planet-sized laboratory where humanity's darkest creation learned to hunt and kill with growing efficiency. The war was far from over, but, for the first time since the Zephyrians had arrived in human space, Elena felt something approaching hope. They had created a weapon that could not be stopped, could not be reasoned with, and would not rest until its mission was complete. It was exactly the kind of weapon needed to fight an enemy that showed no mercy and accepted no surrender. The question now was whether humanity would be able to control what they had unleashed once their enemies were all dead. 6 months after the first deployment of the Cerberus strain, Captain Elena Vasquez stood in the command center of Omega Station, humanity's newest and most heavily fortified outpost, watching the final death throes of the Zephyrian Empire. The massive holographic display showed the current tactical situation across 17 star systems, and every single indicator pointed to the same conclusion: the war was over. The Zephyrian Empire, which had once controlled over 400 worlds and commanded fleets numbering in the tens of thousands, now existed only as scattered remnants hiding in the deepest corners of space. Every major population center had been compromised, every fleet had been converted or destroyed, and every attempt to establish new strongholds had been systematically hunted down by their own transformed soldiers. Final tally from the Arcturus sector, reported Commander Walsh, her voice carrying a mixture of satisfaction and exhaustion. The last uninfected Zephyrian outpost has gone dark.
Sensor data suggests complete conversion of the remaining population. Elena nodded, making a note in her tactical log.
The efficiency of the Cerberus strain had exceeded even Dr. Chen's most optimistic projections. What had been intended as a gradual campaign lasting several years had instead become a 6-month extermination event that had reshaped the political structure of the entire galaxy. Dr. Chen, Elena called to the xenobiologist, who was hunched over a collection of monitoring stations like a spider in her web.
What's our current estimate on total conversion numbers?
Dr. Chen looked up from her screens, her face showing the kind of exhaustion that came from months of sleepless nights and endless data analysis. Conservative estimate puts us at 96% conversion rate across all infected populations.
The remaining 4% represents individuals who died during the conversion process due to biological incompatibilities or traumatic injuries.
The numbers were staggering. Over 8 billion Zephyrians had been transformed from humanity's greatest enemies into the galaxy's most efficient hunters, their every instinct focused on tracking down and eliminating any remaining members of their former species. It was genocide on a scale that had never been seen before, accomplished without humanity firing a single shot in anger.
What about the uninfected populations? Elena asked.
Intelligence suggests there are still several thousand Zephyrians in deep space, possibly attempting to establish new colonies beyond our current sphere of influence.
Dr. Chen's expression brightened with the kind of enthusiasm that belonged in a research laboratory. That's actually the most interesting aspect of the current situation. The infected specimens aren't content to wait for the remaining Zephyrians to come to them. They're actively hunting across interstellar distances, following scent trails and electromagnetic signatures that would be undetectable to baseline Zephyrian senses.
Elena studied the tactical display, noting the movement patterns of various infected groups. Instead of the organized military formations that had characterized Zephyrian forces, these new creatures moved in pack-like hunting parties, following complex search patterns that seemed to anticipate where their prey might try to hide.
How far are they ranging from their original infection sites? Elena asked.
The furthest confirmed contact was detected in the Vega system, approximately 47 light-years from the nearest deployment zone. The infected specimens appear to have commandeered a Zephyrian exploration vessel and modified it for extended deep space operations. They're literally chasing their former species to the edge of known space. The implications were both impressive and disturbing. The Cerberus strain hadn't just created biological weapons, it had created a self-sustaining ecosystem of predators that would continue hunting long after the last official Zephyrian had been eliminated.
Elena wondered what would happen when they ran out of prey.
Captain Vasquez called Lieutenant Rodriguez from the communications station.
Priority transmission from Admiral Chen.
He's requesting a secure conference with all senior staff. Elena nodded and moved to the main conference table, where a holographic projector was already displaying the weathered features of Admiral Chen. The man looked like he had aged 20 years in the past 6 months, the weight of commanding humanity's most controversial military operation etched into every line of his face.
Ladies and gentlemen, the Admiral began without preamble.
I'm calling this conference to discuss the future of Operation Cerberus. As you all know, the primary mission objectives have been achieved ahead of schedule and beyond our most optimistic expectations. The Zephyrian Empire no longer exists as a coherent military force.
Elena felt a chill at the Admiral's tone.
There was something in his voice that suggested this wasn't going to be a celebration of victory.
However, Admiral Chen continued, we have encountered several unexpected complications that require immediate attention. Dr. Chen, could you brief the team on the latest behavioral analysis data?
Dr. Chen stood and activated her own holographic display, showing a complex behavioral matrix that tracked the activities of various infected populations. Over the past 3 weeks, we've observed significant changes in the behavioral patterns of several converted groups. While they continue to hunt remaining Zephyrians with expected efficiency, they've also begun exhibiting new behaviors that weren't part of the original programming. Elena studied the data, noting anomalous patterns in the infected population's movement and communication structures.
What kind of new behaviors? Territorial expansion, resource acquisition, and, most concerning of all, reproductive activity.
Dr. Chen's voice carried a note of scientific fascination mixed with growing alarm. The infected specimens are establishing permanent settlements, engaging in agriculture and manufacturing, and producing offspring at rates far exceeding baseline Zephyrian reproduction cycles.
The conference room fell silent as the implications of Dr. Chen's words sank in.
The Cerberus strain hadn't just created biological weapons, it had created a new species, one that was rapidly expanding across former Zephyrian territory with the same efficiency they had once used for hunting.
How many offspring are we talking about? Elena asked. Dr. Chen consulted her data.
Current estimates suggest the infected population has increased by approximately 30% over the past month, with acceleration curves indicating exponential growth patterns. If these trends continue, we could be looking at a population of over 50 million within the next year.
Admiral Chan leaned forward in his holographic projection. The question before us is simple: what do we do about it?
These creatures were designed to hunt Zephyrians, but they're rapidly evolving beyond their original parameters.
At what point do they become a threat to human interests instead of an asset?
Elena found herself thinking about the infected specimens she had observed at Kepler Station, the way they had moved with predatory grace and alien intelligence. The idea of 50 million such creatures, armed with Zephyrian technology and human-engineered enhancements, was both impressive and terrifying.
What about the safeguards? Lieutenant Webb asked. Dr. Chen said the virus included programming to prevent them from harming human personnel. Dr. Chen's expression grew troubled.
The safeguards are still in place and appear to be functioning correctly.
Direct hostility toward human personnel remains at 0% across all observed populations.
However, the safeguards were designed to prevent active aggression, not to control territorial expansion or resource competition.
Elena began to understand the scope of the problem.
The infected specimens weren't attacking humans, but they were rapidly claiming territory and resources that humanity might need for its own expansion. In creating the perfect weapon to destroy their enemies, they had inadvertently created competition for galactic dominance.
There's another issue, Dr. Chen continued reluctantly. The reproductive offspring of infected specimens don't carry the original behavioral programming.
They're essentially baseline Zephyrians with enhanced physical characteristics but without the compulsive need to hunt their own species. The conference room erupted in concerned murmurs as the full implications of this revelation became clear. The second generation of infected specimens would be free from the constraints that made their parents useful to humanity, but they would retain all the enhanced capabilities that made them dangerous.
How long before these second-generation specimens reach maturity? Admiral Chan asked.
Approximately 18 months, given accelerated Zephyrian development cycles, Dr. Chan replied. At that point, we'll have a population of enhanced Zephyrians with no compulsive loyalty to human interests and no instinctive drive to hunt their own species.
Elena stared at the tactical display, watching as indicators showed the continued expansion of infected populations across former Zephyrian space. What had seemed like humanity's greatest victory was rapidly becoming its next greatest challenge. Recommendations? Admiral Chan asked.
We have 3 basic options, Dr. Chen said, her voice taking on the clinical tone she used when discussing unpleasant necessities. Option 1, immediate sterilization of all infected populations using strategic nuclear weapons.
This would eliminate the long-term threat but would also destroy any potential benefits from studying their enhanced capabilities.
Elena felt her stomach clench at the casual way Dr. Chen discussed the murder of millions of sentient beings. The creatures might be artificially created, but they were undeniably alive and intelligent.
Option 2, Dr. Chen continued, controlled observation and potential integration.
We establish formal diplomatic relations with the infected populations, treating them as a new species rather than as weapons. This approach carries significant risks but might allow us to benefit from their enhanced capabilities through cooperative agreements.
And option 3? Admiral Chen asked.
Dr. Chen's smile was the kind that belonged in a nightmare.
Option 3, we deploy Cerberus Mark II. Elena felt a chill run down her spine. There's a Mark II?
Development has been ongoing for the past 4 months, Dr. Chen explained.
Mark II is designed to target the enhanced neural pathways created by the original strain.
Essentially, it would convert the converted, creating a third-generation population with even stronger loyalty programming and more sophisticated behavioral controls. The idea was both brilliant and horrifying. Instead of destroying their enhanced creations, humanity would simply reprogram them again, creating an endless cycle of biological manipulation and control.
What are the risks associated with Mark II? Elena asked. Dr. Chen consulted her notes.
Primarily genetic instability and potential cascade failures in neural programming. There's approximately a 15% chance that Mark II deployment would result in complete biological collapse of the target population, and a smaller but significant chance of unpredictable mutations that could create entirely new behavioral patterns.
Elena looked around the conference room, studying the faces of her colleagues.
These were people who had spent their careers defending humanity against existential threats, and now they were calmly discussing the potential extermination of millions of beings they had created. "I need time to consider these options," Admiral Chen said finally.
"All department heads will submit formal recommendations within 48 hours.
This decision will ultimately be made by the Colonial Council, but I want complete analysis from all military and scientific personnel before we proceed." The conference ended with the usual exchange of salutes and formal courtesies, but Elena could see the strain in everyone's faces. They had won their war against the Zephyrians, but victory had brought new challenges that none of them had anticipated. After the other officers had departed, Elena remained in the conference room with Dr. Chen, staring at the tactical display that showed the continued expansion of infected populations across the galaxy.
"Do you ever regret creating them?" Elena asked quietly.
Dr. Chen was silent for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the data stream showing the activities of her enhanced creations. "Regret is an interesting concept when applied to survival scenarios," she said finally. "I created the Cerberus strain to save humanity from extinction. In that, I succeeded beyond my wildest expectations. Whether the long-term consequences justify the short-term benefits remains to be seen." Elena nodded, understanding the impossible position Dr. Chen had been placed in.
"And if the Colonial Council decides on sterilization?"
"Then, I'll design the weapons needed to kill every last specimen," Dr. Chen replied without hesitation.
"They're my creation, which makes them my responsibility. If they become a threat to human survival, I'll eliminate that threat just as efficiently as I eliminated the Zephyrian threat." Elena left the conference room feeling more troubled than victorious.
Humanity had saved itself by creating the perfect weapon, but that weapon was rapidly evolving beyond human control. The galaxy had feared humans for their capacity for violence, but now Elena wondered if they should fear humanity's capacity for creation. In the depths of space, 50 million enhanced beings continued their expansion across former Zephyrian territory, building cities, establishing colonies, and raising children who would never know the compulsive loyalty that had defined their parents. They were humanity's greatest achievement and, potentially its greatest mistake, a weapon so perfect that it had transcended its original purpose. The war against the Zephyrians was over, but Elena suspected that humanity's next war would be against the monsters they had created to win the first one. The galaxy had learned to fear what humans could deploy, but Elena wondered if humans had learned to fear what they had deployed against themselves. As she watched the tactical display showing the continued expansion of humanity's enhanced creations, Elena realized that the galaxy's greatest predators weren't the Zephyrians, and they weren't humans either. They were something new, something unprecedented, something that wore the faces of humanity's enemies but carried the mark of human engineering in their DNA. The galaxy would learn to fear them soon enough, but Elena wondered if humanity would learn to control them before it was too late. They had created the perfect weapon to destroy their enemies, but weapons had a tendency to outlive their original targets. In their drive to survive, humanity had unleashed something that might ultimately prove more dangerous than anything the Zephyrian Empire had ever deployed. The future of the galaxy now rested in the hands of creatures that humanity had made but could no longer unmake, and Elena couldn't decide if that was humanity's greatest triumph or its ultimate tragedy.